The letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, and Gary Hollis read it standing at his kitchen counter in Adair County, Kentucky, still wearing his work jacket, still holding the mail he'd pulled from the box at the end of the driveway. He read it once quickly, the way you read something when the first line tells you what kind of letter it is. Then he set everything else down and read it again slowly. A John Deere's Warranty Administration office was informing him that his 2021 6155R tractor, a machine he'd purchased 14 months earlier for $112,000, had been flagged following a routine diagnostic upload. The flag indicated a fault code anomaly in the engine control module that was, per the letter's language, consistent with unauthorized software modification or third-party diagnostic interference. Effective immediately, his powertrain warranty was under review. Pending investigation, a coverage on the affected systems was suspended. Gary set the letter on the counter and looked out the window at his equipment shed, where the 6155R sat visible through the open doors, green and yellow in the gray March light. He had not modified the software. He had not hired a third party to interfere with anything. What he had done 8 weeks earlier on a cold January morning was call his neighbor, Darrell Prewitt, who had been working on farm equipment in Adair County for 31 years and who charged $85 an hour compared to the authorized dealer's $140, and ask him to run a diagnostic scan after the tractor started throwing a fault code on the hydraulic pressure sensor. Darrell had come over with his scan tool, read the code, cleared it, confirmed the hydraulic system was functioning normally, and charged Gary $68 for 45 minutes of his time. The fault code never returned. That was it. That was the unauthorized third-party diagnostic interference. Gary was 51 years old. He farmed 380 acres of corn and soybeans in a county where the authorized John Deere dealer was 38 miles away in Columbia, and where service appointments during planting season ran 6 to 8 weeks out. He had been a John Deere customer for 19 years, had purchased 7 pieces of equipment from the same dealer, and had never filed a warranty claim on any of them until the previous October, when the 6155R's front axle developed a clunk that turned out to be a failed pivot bushing, covered under warranty, repaired without incident. That claim had cost John Deere $1,400. He did not think about that number as he stood at the kitchen counter reading the letter. He thought about the $112,000 he'd financed at 4.8% over 7 years, and about the remaining powertrain coverage that represented his protection against the kind of catastrophic repair bill that could turn a marginal year into a ruinous one. He thought about the spring planting season 6 weeks away, and then he thought about Darrell Prewitt, who had done nothing wrong and who had no idea that a scan tool and $68 had apparently triggered a warranty review on a 6-figure machine. Gary called the warranty administration number on the letterhead that afternoon. He was transferred twice before reaching a representative named Cassandra, who read him language from a screen about the company's right to investigate potential warranty violations and about the review timeline, which was 4 to 6 weeks. Gary asked whether his warranty coverage was active during the review period. Cassandra said it was suspended pending investigation. Gary asked what would happen if the tractor needed a major repair during the next 4 to 6 weeks. Cassandra said that any repairs during the suspension period would need to be assessed after the investigation concluded. Gary asked her to clarify what that meant. She said it meant coverage decisions would be made on a case-by-case basis following the review. He thanked her and hung up. Then he sat at the kitchen table for a long time without doing anything, which was not his habit. Gary Hollis was not a man given to stillness. His wife, Renee, who had known him for 26 years, would later describe the quality of that particular stillness as the kind that preceded serious decisions, the kind she recognized because she had seen it exactly twice before in their marriage, and both times something had changed permanently afterward. What Gary was doing, sitting at that table, I was thinking through the arithmetic of his situation with the methodical patience of a man who had spent 3 decades making decisions in which the margin for error was narrow and the consequences of miscalculation were personal and financial and irreversible. The arithmetic was this. He had paid $112,000 for a tractor. The tractor carried a 5-year powertrain warranty that represented, conservatively, $15,000 to $40,000 in potential coverage, depending on what failed and when. And that warranty was now suspended because a neighbor had plugged a scan tool into the diagnostic port and read a fault code, something any dealer technician would have done as a first step in any service call. The only difference between Darrell Prewitt doing it and an authorized technician doing it was the authorization, not the action, not the outcome, just the credential attached to the person holding the tool. Gary understood what was happening. He did not yet know what to do about it. And he called his neighbor Phil Combs that evening, not because Phil had any expertise in warranty law or corporate policy, but because Phil had been farming the land adjacent to Gary's south fence line for 23 years and had the particular quality that Gary most valued in a person during a difficult situation, which was the ability to listen without filling the silence with words that didn't help. Phil listened. When Gary finished, Phil said, "How many other people you think this has happened to?" Gary said he didn't know. Phil said, "Might be worth finding out." That was Tuesday. By Thursday morning, Gary had talked to 11 farmers in Adair and Casey counties. He had not gone looking for shared grievances. He had simply described what had happened to him, plainly and without embellishment, to people he knew well enough to call, and the responses he got back were not sympathy. They were recognition. Carl Meadows, who farmed 520 acres outside Liberty, said his 2019 832 OR had been flagged for warranty review the previous spring after he'd taken it to an independent shop for an oil analysis. The review had taken 8 weeks, during which a fuel injector failed, and he'd paid $2,200 out of pocket on the grounds that the repair fell within the suspension period. The review had concluded with no finding of unauthorized modification, and his warranty had been quietly reinstated. But the $2,200 was never reimbursed. Sandra Hartwell, who ran a 200-acre operation with her husband outside Campbellsville, said she'd received a similar letter 2 years ago after a dealer tech noticed, during an unrelated service visit, that she had used aftermarket oil filters, John Deere approved grade, just not John Deere branded, and flagged it as a potential warranty concern. The flag had been resolved, but it had taken 3 phone calls and 6 weeks. And Sandra said the experience had left her with the specific distrust of a person who has learned that a relationship she thought was straightforward is not. Ray Dunbar, 67 years old, who had been farming Casey County his entire life and who had purchased his first John Deere tractor in 1981, said simply, "They've been doing this for years. The only difference now is they can see everything the machine does." That last sentence stayed with Gary. He wrote it down, because Ray Dunbar was pointing at something that most of the conversation around farm equipment didn't address directly, which was that modern John Deere equipment, anything built in the last decade, transmitted operational data back to the company continuously through its telematics system. Every fault code, every software update, every third-party connection to the diagnostic port. The machine was not just a machine. It was a machine that reported. And the reporting happened automatically, and without the farmer's active involvement, as a background condition of ownership that was disclosed in the purchase agreement in language that most buyers read the way they read the terms and conditions on a software download, which is to say, not at all. Gary had not read it. He said so when Carl Meadows asked him. Carl said he hadn't either. Sandra Hartwell said her husband had read parts of it and still hadn't understood what the telematics clause meant in practical terms. Ray Dunbar said he didn't need to read it because he'd figured out what it meant the hard way. By Friday afternoon, Gary had a list of 19 farmers who had received warranty suspension or review letters following routine diagnostic activity by non-authorized technicians or non-authorized tools. Not modifications, not hacks, not attempts to circumvent the machine's systems. Diagnostics. The act of reading what the machine was reporting about itself, performed by someone who didn't have John Deere's permission to do the reading. The list was 19 people. Gary suspected the actual number was much larger and that most of the people it had happened to had simply paid whatever they were told to pay and moved on. Because that was the path of least resistance and because the alternative, disputing a warranty decision with a corporation that had a legal department and a customer service script and 4 to 6 weeks to wait you out, required a tolerance for conflict that most people working a farm through planting season did not have available. Gary had that tolerance. He was not sure why exactly. Renee would have said it was the particular stubbornness that had kept him farming in a county where the margins were thin and the work was hard, and a less stubborn man would have sold out and done something easier years ago. Gary would have said it was something older than stubbornness. He spent Saturday building the file. He pulled his purchase agreement from the drawer where he kept documents he might need again. He printed the warranty terms and conditions in full. He laid out Darrell Prewitt's invoice, date, time, work performed, cost, no modification, code cleared, system normal, and placed it next to the suspension letter so the two documents faced each other on the table like opposing witnesses. It was somewhere in that arrangement of papers, in the particular quiet of a Saturday morning, with the house to himself and the fields visible through the window, that a thing his father had said came back to him. Not as a memory exactly, but more as a sensation, the way certain voices arrive, not in your ears, but somewhere behind them. His father, Donald Hollis, had farmed this same Adair County ground for 41 years before his knees gave out, and he sold the operation to Gary in 1998. He had not been a sentimental man and had not offered advice freely. But one winter evening when Gary was 19 and had just broken a piece of equipment through carelessness and was braced for anger, his father had said something Gary had never forgotten. He had said, "The land doesn't care what you paid for the machine. It only cares whether the work gets done." And then he had picked up the broken part, examined it without comment, and started explaining how to fix it. Gary had understood it at 19 as a lesson about machinery. He understood it differently now, at 51, sitting at a table covered in documents. The land doesn't care what you paid. It doesn't care about the warranty terms or the telematics clause or the 4 to 6 week review timeline. It cares whether you show up, whether the field gets turned at the right moment, whether the window gets used. All the machinery, the $112,000 tractor, the 5-year powertrain coverage, the corporate system that had decided a neighbor's $68 diagnostic visit constituted grounds for suspension, existed to serve that one fundamental obligation. And when the machinery of commerce positioned itself between a farmer and that obligation, something had gone wrong that no service representative could fix with case-by-case language over the phone. That was what Gary was building a file against. Not John Deere specifically, not the suspension letter specifically. The idea that the equipment a man depended on to honor his obligations to his land could be turned by a clause in a purchase agreement and an automated telematics flag swung into a lever that someone else controlled. He printed the telematics section of his purchase agreement and highlighted 3 sentences. The first established that operational data was transmitted to John Deere continuously. The second defined the company's right to use that data in warranty determinations. The third, and this was the sentence Gary found most interesting, stated that the use of non-authorized diagnostic tools may be considered during warranty review, a formulation that was technically permissive while functioning in practice as a prohibition, because no one who received a letter like Gary's would conclude that "may be considered" meant anything other than "will be used against you." He showed the highlighted sentences to Renee on Saturday evening. She read them twice and said, "That's written to sound like a warning, but act like a rule." Gary said, "That's exactly what it is." On Monday morning, Gary drove to Columbia and walked into the office of a man named Tom Garrity, who had been the county extension agent for Adair County for 16 years and who had, in that role, become the closest thing to a neutral institutional authority on farm-related disputes that the county possessed. Gary laid his file on Tom's desk and explained what had happened, without editorializing and without asking Tom to do anything specific. He just wanted Tom to know. Tom Garrity read through the file carefully. He asked 2 questions. First, had Gary sent a written response to the Warranty Administration Office? Gary said not yet. Tom said that should happen before anything else, in writing, return receipt, citing the specific invoice showing the nature of the diagnostic visit and the absence of any modification. Second, did Gary know whether this was covered under Kentucky's consumer protection statutes? Gary said he didn't. Tom said he'd make a call. The call was to an attorney in Lexington named Patricia Odom, who specialized in agricultural disputes and who had, over the previous several years, handled 3 cases involving warranty actions by major equipment manufacturers following diagnostic activity by independent technicians. When Tom described Gary's situation, Patricia said she'd heard versions of it before. She said the pattern had a name in the legal community, not a formal legal term, but a working description that the attorneys who handled these cases used among themselves. They called it diagnostic entrapment. The manufacturer's telematics system flags non-authorized diagnostic activity. The flag triggers a warranty review. The review creates a suspension window. Anything that fails during the suspension window creates ambiguity about coverage. Most farmers facing that ambiguity during planting or harvest season pay the repair bill and move on. Patricia said the practice was not clearly illegal. The terms were disclosed. But she said the disclosures were written in a way that obscured their practical effect, and that in her view, a court would find the combination of continuous telematics monitoring, automated flagging of non-authorized diagnostic activity, and warranty suspension based on that activity to be, at minimum, an aggressive interpretation of what a warranty was supposed to do. A warranty, she said, I was supposed to protect the buyer from manufacturing defects. What Gary was describing was a warranty that protected the manufacturer's service network from competition. Gary drove back to Adair County with Patricia Odom's card in his jacket pocket and a clearer understanding of the situation than he'd had when he left. That evening, he called the 19 farmers on his list and told them what Patricia had said. He did not ask them to do anything. He told them about the file he had built. I told them Patricia Odom was willing to take a consultation call from anyone who wanted one, and told them that he was planning to send a formal written response to John Deere's Warranty Administration Office on Thursday by certified mail, with copies of all supporting documentation. Anyone who wanted to attach a similar letter to the same mailing was welcome to do so. 14 of the 19 said they would. The letters went out on Thursday, as Gary had said they would. 14 certified envelopes, 14 return receipt cards, 14 documented cases of warranty suspension or review following non-authorized diagnostic activity, organized into a single packet and addressed to John Deere's Warranty Administration Office in Moline, Illinois, with a cover letter that Gary had written himself and that Patricia Odom had reviewed. The cover letter was 2 pages. It stated the facts of Gary's situation without elaboration. It cited the 19 known cases across 2 Kentucky counties, of which 14 were formally documented in the attached submissions. It noted that Patricia Odom had been retained and was available for communication with the company's legal department. It asked for 3 things: reinstatement of Gary's warranty effective immediately, a written explanation of the specific finding that had triggered the suspension, and a clarification of the company's policy on non-authorized diagnostic activity and its effect on warranty coverage. It was not a threat. It was a record. Gary did not know, when he sent the letters, whether anything would come of them. Patricia had told him the outcomes in these situations varied considerably, that some companies resolved them quickly to avoid the appearance of a pattern, and that others let them proceed toward litigation rather than set a precedent. And she said the packet of 14 cases was significant because it transformed a single customer complaint into a documented pattern, and that the distinction mattered to the people in Moline who would read it. He came home, put the return receipt stubs in his file, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. 11 days later, his phone rang at 8:15 on a Wednesday morning. The caller identified herself as Diane Calloway from John Deere's Customer Resolution Office. She said she was calling regarding the correspondence received from Gary Hollis and a number of other customers, and that she wanted to understand the situation from his perspective before the company responded formally. Gary described his situation from his perspective, clearly and without anger. He described Darrell Prewitt's visit, the fault code, the $68 invoice, the letter that arrived 8 weeks later. He described his call with Cassandra and the answers he'd received. And he described the 19 farmers he'd spoken to and the 14 letters in the packet. Diane Calloway listened without interrupting. When Gary finished, she said she appreciated him taking the time to explain it, and that she wanted to be transparent with him about something. She said the flagging system that had triggered his review was automated, generated by the telematics system without human review, based on detection of a non-authorized connection to the diagnostic port. She said the automation was designed to protect against software modification, but that, in Gary's case, and apparently in a number of similar cases, it had flagged activity that was diagnostic rather than modifying. She said the company took that distinction seriously. Gary said, "Does the letter that farmers receive when this happens make that distinction clear?" There was a pause. Diane said, "I think we'd acknowledge that the language could be clearer." Gary said, "The letter I received said my warranty was suspended pending investigation of unauthorized software modification. Darrell Prewitt read a fault code. He didn't modify anything." Another pause, shorter this time. Diane said, "I understand." 4 days later, a letter arrived from John Deere's Customer Resolution Office. It confirmed the reinstatement of Gary's full powertrain warranty, retroactive to the original purchase date, with no gap in coverage. It stated that the diagnostic activity documented in his submission did not constitute unauthorized modification under the warranty terms. It did not address the 14 other cases directly, but it was addressed to Gary Hollis and contained no language that limited its application to him specifically. Gary read it once, folded it, and put it in his file next to the original suspension letter. He called Patricia Odom, who said the resolution was as favorable as she would have expected, and that the retroactive reinstatement was meaningful because it closed the suspension window. She said the language about diagnostic activity not constituting unauthorized modification was the sentence that mattered, because it was now a written statement from the company that Gary could use if the issue arose again. Gary called Phil Combs, who had asked on Tuesday evening how many other people this had happened to, and who had not asked anything since, trusting Gary to figure out what to do with the answer. Phil said, "What about the other 13? Gary said he'd asked Patricia the same question. Patricia had said the letters from the other 14 farmers were still under review by the company's legal department, and that she expected similar resolutions given the consistency of the documentation and the fact that Gary's case had established the company's own position in writing. She was right. Over the following 6 weeks, 12 of the 13 remaining farmers received reinstatement letters. The 13th case involved a complication unrelated to the diagnostic issue, an actual modification that a previous owner had made before the farmer purchased the tractor used, and was resolved through a separate process. Carl Meadows received a check from John Deere's Customer Resolution Office in the amount of $2,200. No explanation was attached. It arrived certified mail, return receipt. Gary heard about the check from Carl on a Thursday morning in early April. And he was standing in his equipment shed doing a pre-season check on the 6155R, the same machine that had sat here under a suspended warranty 8 weeks earlier, now fully covered, running cleanly, hydraulics normal, no fault codes. Carl told him about the check and said, "I don't think I ever would have gotten that if you hadn't made it about more than just your own situation." Gary said that wasn't how he'd thought about it. But he said he'd just talked to people he knew about something that had happened to him, and it turned out the same thing had happened to them. Carl said, "That's what I mean." The 6155R started on the first turn of the key. Gary pulled it out of the shed into the April morning, the engine settling into its idle, the field monitor cycling through its startup checks. Everything working the way it was supposed to. Nothing remarkable about the morning at all. But he sat in the cab for a moment before pulling toward the field, and he thought about his father, about that winter evening 40 years ago, the broken part, the voice that had not offered sympathy, but had offered something more useful. The land doesn't care what you paid for the machine. It only cares whether the work gets done. He put the tractor in gear. The April fields were dark and wet from the previous week's rain, the soil just beginning to dry to the edge of workable. A few weeks until his planting window, plenty of time. He had the documentation. And he had work to do. Under this video, you'll see a subscribe button, a small action with a big meaning. By pressing it, you're not only supporting the creation of more content like this, but you're also becoming part of the very exchange we've been talking about. Giving and receiving in harmony. It's not about the size of the action, it's about the meaning. A simple subscription tells me these words reached you. It tells me that the effort, the late nights, and the discipline to bring this message forward mattered to someone on the other side of the screen.